Welcome to everyone for tonight's program. We're really looking forward to this, I'm sure, because it will stretch our sense of scientific wonder and spiritual imagination all at once as we listen to our principal speaker, Nancy Ellen Abrams. She's going to be followed after she offers her talk by a brief comment and probably some questions. I suspect very challenging questions from Father Joseph Bracken, a distinguished philosopher who has managed somehow to walk the tightrope between Whiteheadian, Charles Hartshorne philosophy, process philosophy, and a traditional theistic Christian notion of God as triune. Relationality in both camps, but many pitfalls in trying to bridge the gap. So Dr. Bracken, Professor Bracken, will be speaking to us. We'll turn the audio over to him after Nancy's presentation. And then Nancy will reply with thoughts that are addressed to Dr. Bracken. But then we want very much to bring as many of you into the conversation as we possibly can. To do that, let me call your attention to the bottom center of your screen. Draw your eye down to the bottom center, and you'll see a little icon that says Q&A. If you open that icon, type your question. I will read them here, and clearly I will choose the best, most succinct, most original questions and bump them to the top of the list. But we will go at those questions till 6:30 Eastern Time, an hour and a half from now, probably a little bit later, as Maynard has indicated. Now, if that isn't enough for you, there's going to be an after hours informal conversation. If you open the little chat link later on in this presentation, you will see a URL, a link that will guide you to another Zoom meeting. And whoever wants, go get some refreshments if you wish, but it's an opportunity to hang out and talk about pretty much anything, whether it's this presentation or something else. So the plate is full for this evening. We're delighted to welcome all of you, but particularly let me introduce now and welcome Nancy Ellen Abrams. She's going to be speaking to us live from her home in Santa Cruz, California. She is a multi-talented person, a philosopher of science, a lawyer, an author, indeed a best-selling author, I should say, and a composer, a musician, recorded, award-winning teaching and lectures together with her husband, the cosmologist Joel Primack. In the early part of this century, they developed a course called The View from the Center of the Universe, and that turned into a book. They were invited to give the prestigious Terry Lectures at Yale in 2009, and that turned into a book entitled The New Universe and the Human Future. The book that is featured especially tonight is called A God That Could Be Real, Spirituality, Science, and the Future of Our Planet. If you haven't seen it, I'm sure the title will draw you to it. A God That Could Be Real. Well, she's going to be talking to us tonight on a slightly variant theme coming out of that book. Title of this presentation is The Unifying Potential of a God That Is Real in the Scientific Universe. So let me turn this over now to Nancy Ellen Abrams. Nancy, please go ahead.
Well, hello, thank you. Thank you, Maynard and Ron, and thanks to all of you out there. Well, here we are in lockdown against a plague, stuck on Zoom. The economy is crashing around us. Fascism is rising. And we're gathered to discuss science and religion. Why? What good can that do us right now? Well, this is a question I want to address today. because it matters. It matters because not just this pandemic, but climate change, mass extinction, peak energy, loss of habit, even racism, misogyny, abortion, all of these issues are either caused by or exacerbated by refusal to believe the relevant science. And this refusal is justified by many people by their religion. Unfortunately, there really isn't a religion that doesn't consider science non-optional. They often assume that science can be ignored because it's inconvenient by defining it as a separate reality or a different way of thinking or night language versus day language. And this may work for their philosophies, but the fact of the matter is it's not working to motivate people to save this world. Now, I'm going to be screen sharing on and off. So this is my very first Zoom talk. So I hope that the technology works smoothly, but if not, I'm sure you'll be tolerant of me. Okay, let's see. Sorry. There we go. Okay. So the talk is called The Unifying Potential of a God That Could Be Real in the Scientific Universe. Now, Joseph Campbell, in his last book, The Inner Reaches of Outer Space, wrote, "The old gods are dead or dying, and people everywhere are searching, asking, what is the new mythology to be? The mythology of this unified earth as of one harmonious being." Now, Campbell had no way of knowing where this new mythology could come from because he died in 1987. And it turns out that the answer appeared in the 1990s. So I'm going to be basing my talk mostly, but not entirely, on my book, A God That Could Be Real, which Ron just mentioned. And I'm going to stop screen sharing for just a little while. And now, am I back or not? Can somebody tell me if you can see me, or are we still screen sharing?
No, you're fine.
Okay, good. Now, we know so many things that could be done, both technologically and socially, to deal with all the problems that I just mentioned, but we are not doing them at a scale that can make any difference at all. We can't seem to find common ground that would be a basis for worldwide cooperation. But if we want to survive as a species, we need an accurate map of reality, and we have to accept the science, however weird it may turn out to be. But even with that kind of knowledge, if we don't have some kind of a spiritual motivation to act together, we might not do anything. So I think that our job in discussing what religion should be in an age of science is to try to find that common ground and to uphold that as sacred. If it's not held sacred, it won't be held long. And what I want to suggest today is that there is such common ground, and it is the immensity of our cosmic past and our potential future, our shared origin story, and a God that supports that story and is supported by the story. Now, you may think that such a God is not possible, but let me just say that you can't know what's possible or impossible until you know what kind of a universe you're living in. Now, most people don't realize it, but We are in the midst of a scientific revolution that is as huge as the Copernican revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries. At that time, Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, and Newton figured out that Earth is not the stable center of the universe, but is a planet that moves around the sun. This was such an enormous discovery that it really was a huge factor in ending the Middle Ages and bringing in the Enlightenment. But what happened then is that people extrapolated their understanding of the solar system, which was right, to the entire universe, and that was wrong. But they had no way of knowing because there was no data about the distant universe at the time. The universe has turned out to be so much weirder than anyone expected. Even Einstein did not expect it. Now, there have been thousands of origin stories told by human beings over the centuries and the millennia, but this is the first one that's ever been supported by the evidence. And it's based on dark matter, dark energy, and the process of emergence. Now, what's surprising is that it almost requires an astonishing phenomenon that is different from all current religions' ideas of God, but is godlike to us. And whether or not we choose to call it God, this phenomenon is real. And if it's recognized, it could both unify us and also expand us as individuals. So I'm a philosopher of science, as Ron mentioned, and I am married to a cosmologist, Joel Premack, who is one of the creators of the modern picture of the universe. And I'm going to give a very brief overview of the new picture because all of my thinking about God has been inspired by that perspective and coherent with it. So a little background, in the late 1970s, it was known that the universe had begun in a Big Bang, which had created the elementary particles. But the great mystery that my husband and his colleagues were trying to solve was this. If the Big Bang was symmetrical in all directions, why isn't the universe just a bigger soup of particles? Instead, there are spectacular galaxies, ellipticals, and spiral galaxies scattered throughout the universe, each galaxy with hundreds of billions of stars. But they're not scattered randomly. It's as if there were invisible lines of glue, and gold had been, glitter had been sprinkled on the lines of glue. With every fleck of glitter, a huge galaxy. And where the lines intersect, great clusters of galaxies have formed. Why? What force took the elementary particles from the Big Bang and moved everything into this, what's called the large scale structure of the universe? So I'm going to start screen sharing here so you can see what I'm talking about. Oops. So many steps here. So this is the modern scientific cosmos. And at the top, you'll see a schematic of the solar system. And Earth is the third rock out from the sun. It takes about 8 minutes for light to get from the sun to us. It takes 40 minutes for it to get to Jupiter, 80 minutes to get out to Saturn, and less than a day to traverse the entire solar system. Now, the entire solar system is a dot at the bottom of the V that you see where it says the V that ends in the middle of the galaxy. And you'll see that the Milky Way galaxy, our galaxy, is 100,000 light years across. The galaxy, in turn, is just a dot on the scale of our local supercluster of galaxies. And we're in something called the local group. And we are going to take a little trip across our local supercluster to the Virgo cluster, which is the center of it. And we're going to cover about 60 million light years. So we're going to head toward this constellation, which I'm sure you recognize. And let's go. Now we head toward the sword of Orion, but as we approach the sword, you can see it's not really a star. It's a star nursery. You can see the stars forming inside it. The next interesting object is the Horsehead Nebula, also a star nursery. And all of the stars you're seeing here have been mapped. This is our local region of the galaxy. These are not randomly put in there. These are the mapped stars. It's the Rosette Nebula, another star nursery where new stars are forming inside a giant hydrogen cloud. But the next one we're going to see is not a nursery. It is the remnants of a supernova. And if you look carefully at the middle, you'll see a pulsar. Now, a lot of the galaxy can't be seen because it's full of dust, and many of the stars are blocked by this dust that comes from these supernovae. So let's rise up and out of the galaxy and see what a big galaxy like ours looks like. Now, everything you see from here on is not a star, but a galaxy. You can start to see the filamentary structure. You can see Andromeda in the background, and we're going through the Triangulum galaxy. And at this point, when we pass through this galaxy, we're 2 million light years from home. You can see that many of the galaxies are spirals like ours. You see the large cluster at the left, that's the Virgo cluster, but we're not going to go directly toward it. We're going to enter a filament and ride down the filament into the Virgo cluster. And as we ride down the filament, as we get close to this cluster, you'll see that many of the galaxies don't have disks. They're just balls of stars, and those are called elliptical galaxies. Okay, we're entering the filament now. And our journey ends at this gigantic galaxy at the center of the Virgo cluster, with a black hole at the center that weighs 3 billion times the mass of the sun. Now, the new theory challenged the age-old assumption that everything is made of atoms. Instead, it says, everything that astronomers can observe in all wavelengths of radiation, with all instruments on the ground, in space, everywhere, everything we can observe, the stars, the planets, the glowing gas clouds in our galaxy, all the distant galaxies together, total less than half of 1% of what's actually out there. The vast majority of matter in the universe is not made of atoms or the parts of atoms. It's something completely different, and it's invisible because it doesn't even interact with light. It's called dark matter. The other key ingredient in the universe is the even more mysterious dark energy, which is the energy that is causing the expansion of the universe to accelerate. So dark matter plus dark energy makes the double dark theory. It has a technical name, lambda CDM, but the nickname for it is the double dark theory. Now, imagine that the entire universe is an ocean of dark energy. And on that ocean, there sail billions of ghostly ships made of dark matter. And at the tops of the tallest masts of the largest ships are these little beacons of light. Those beacons are what we call the galaxies. Until this theory, we did not know that the ships or the ocean were there. But now we do know it through the double dark theory. So you can see there's a pyramid built into this picture. And dark energy is the big base of the pyramid. It's 70% of the matter and energy content of the universe. The dark matter is about 25%. There's about 4% invisible atoms that are basically hydrogen and helium out between the galaxies. And the visible matter is just 0.5%. But almost all of that is in stars. The kind of atoms that we are made of, the heavy atoms, carbon, oxygen, silicon, nitrogen, these atoms represent 1/100th of 1% of the universe. So we are made of the rarest material in the universe. Let me show you how the dark matter fits in. I showed you that the Milky Way was 100,000 light years across, but that was only the visible part, and that's represented here in the middle of the picture. The dark matter halo is the whole rest of the picture, and you can see it's very clumpy, and some of the clumps are so large that they probably contain small galaxies inside them. But the dark matter halo of our galaxy is 1.5 million light years across. And let me show you how that fits into the still larger scale structure. What you're seeing here is a slice a billion light years across. What you're seeing here is just dark matter. Of course, you're seeing it because we have to make it visible, but it's totally invisible. And the areas that look bright, that's density. Brightness represents density in this. So there are no visible galaxies. If you look at the brightest dot here, there will probably be a gigantic cluster of galaxies deep inside there. So the story that goes with this is that there's been a multi-billion-year competition between dark matter and dark energy. Dark matter pulls ordinary matter together, while dark energy is ripping space apart. And the interaction of these forces has spun the galaxies into being and created the only possible homes for the evolution of planets and life. Now, when my husband and his colleagues first proposed this theory, they really didn't know if it was true because there was so little evidence about the distant universe. But psychologically, as serious scientists do, they moved into this theoretical universe with total commitment, and they literally spent decades exploring it in their minds, looking for every nook and cranny. What predictions would it make that could be observable? Could it be shot down? Because if it could be shot down, they didn't want somebody else to do it. They wanted to do it. So one of the things they did was they repeatedly simulated the entire 13.8 billion year evolution of the universe on NASA supercomputers, testing different assumptions and new data. Because the idea was, if that ends up with a universe that looks just like the one we observe, then probably the assumptions that were plugged in the beginning were true. So over the past 40 years, countries around the world have built observatories on mountaintops, underground, in space, and overwhelming evidence has come in to support this theory. And so the double dark theory has triggered a scientific revolution. It explains what happened after the Big Bang. And it also incorporates another theory called cosmic inflation, which explains the instant before the Big Bang that set up the initial conditions for the Big Bang and left wrinkles in space-time that created the cosmic web you are seeing now. I'm not going to go into that theory, but that is an essential part of it. I'm going to stop screen sharing here, Now, these scientific theories tell us our cosmic origin story with the authority of the evidence, and they don't need God and they don't have God. The fact is that no God could have created this universe. It had to evolve. And despite the fact that lots of people like to say it, no God could have used evolution as a method to create anything in particular because its results cannot be planned. It involves random events under infinitely varying conditions and influences, and no God could keep track of all that because in a relativistic universe, omniscience is impossible. Now, I was an atheist for the first half of my life. I never took the idea of God seriously, not even as a child. But 30-some years ago, I had to accept that I had an addiction and I needed a 12-step program. And the 12-step program is a spiritual program which challenges you to find a way of thinking about higher power that actually works for you. So when I started, of course, I thought, well, this is not going to work for me because there's no way I'm going to believe in a higher power. But meanwhile, I was watching this process of cosmic discovery unfold. And I knew all the scientists. I often had long philosophical discussions with them. I co-authored 2 books about it with my husband, about basically our human place. How could we fit into this universe? And the whole process had a strange and a powerful effect on me. I felt like I was being opened up to layers of reality that I had never experienced before. But I still had nothing when it came to the concept of higher power. Then on TV, just by chance, I saw an interview with Carl Jung in his last years. It was filmed in 1950s. And the interviewer ended by asking him, Dr. Jung, does God exist? And Jung said, well, I can't say for certain that God exists, but what I can say for certain is that every person has a God capacity. And I was stunned by that word, God capacity. All of us humans, it means, have the capacity to conceive of a God or gods and experience that idea as the embodiment of powers and meanings greater than ourselves. So God capacity is in our biology. It has nothing to do with any particular religion. It arose with the evolving size of our brains, which allowed our consciousness to expand beyond awareness of the material world and the beings around us to abstract thought, imagination, and aspiration. Now, in our society, our religions professionally tell us what God is like and what God does and what God expects of us, but that's just their story. I realized that the reason I was an atheist was that I was dismissing other people's views of God, and I had never considered the possibility that I had a God capacity of my own. Taking this idea seriously completely changed my life. And it was in ways that I could not have imagined if I hadn't actually experienced it. To me, no version of God that conflicts with our cosmic story can possibly be real. And if it's not real, I'm not even interested in it. But if it's real, I'm very interested in it. But the only way God can be real is to be real in the unexplored possibilities of this new universe. If there's anything outside our universe, it's not our God, because there's no way we can contact anything outside the universe, and there's no way it could contact us. We need to let the nature of the universe teach us about God, rather than always doing the opposite and letting scriptural ideas about God try to teach us about nature. It's this backward thinking that is preventing us from demanding and discovering a God that's real. Now, in order to be real, we need to rethink first what the concept of spiritual actually can mean for us in this universe. I'm going to screen share again here. So this is a symbol, one of 7 actually, that my husband and I developed for our books, that we use to illustrate the human place in the double dark universe. Of course, it's a reinterpretation of the very ancient cosmic symbol of a serpent swallowing its tail. So that is called an Uroboros, which literally means in Greek, tail swallowing. But here we're using it to represent the visible universe as the range of all possible sizes. And its size is a very interesting concept because it turns out to be a key to understanding how everything operates in the universe. The universe is not just the big size, the universe is all sizes. Now, in mathematics, of course, numbers go on forever, but in the physical universe, there is actually a largest and a smallest possible size that things can actually be. So we can actually mark all of the possible sizes on the Cosmic Uroboros in powers of 10. So here, the tip of the tail represents the smallest size that we can say anything meaningful about, because it's the smallest size that current physics allows. It's called the Planck length, 10 to the minus 33 centimeters. The largest size we can say anything meaningful about is the size of the entire visible universe. And the cosmic horizon is 10 to the 29 centimeters. So that's 1 with 29 zeros after it. Now the objects at each tick mark are 10 to the 5 times, that is 100,000 times bigger than the object at the tick mark before. So if we start on the upper right, there is just next to the head, there's a supercluster of galaxies, the size 10 to the 25 centimeters. Then coming down in size, the next size scale is a galaxy. Then the distance to the stars in Orion. Then the size of the solar system, the size of the sun, the earth, a mountain, people, an ant, a single-celled creature, a molecule of DNA, a single atom, the nucleus of the atom, the W and Z particles which carry certain forces, and probably the dark matter is in that window where the question mark is. Now, the video that you just saw covered that distance. Now, how do we fit in? How do we humans fit into this astonishingly big universe? Well, many times I've heard people say that when they look up into the starry sky at night, it makes them feel small and insignificant. That is based on 17th century thinking. Here's where we actually are. We humans are at the midpoint of all possible sizes. From the viewpoint of size, we are central to the universe. And the interesting thing is we really couldn't be anywhere else, because if we were very much larger, the speed of light would be too slow for us to think. If we were very much smaller, we would not be made of enough atoms to have the kind of consciousness that we do. The midpoint of all sizes is where all intelligent beings have to be in the universe. So if there are intelligent aliens on some other world, we know at least one important thing about them. We know how big they are. Now, that doesn't mean they're like 5 or 6 feet tall. It means a tiny little range between, say, a redwood tree and a puppy. They've got to fit in there somewhere. So let's take a 45-second trip around the Cosmic Uroboros from a scale larger than superclusters down past the human scale to the elementary particles. We're trying to not cross space, but dive into it. You'll see what size we're looking at, where the arrow points on the Cosmic Uroboros. So we're down to the size of the galaxy already. Diving into the galaxy. We're coming into our solar system. feature, the atoms inside the DNA, the nucleus of an atom. Those are supposed to be quarks at the end. So let's take a little closer look at the blue section of the Cosmic Uroboros. It represents the range of sizes that human beings can see with the naked eye and for which we have intuition. So I've named that size range Midgard, and I picked this name because in the Old Norse mythology, Midgard represented the human world, and it was an island of stability and civilization in the midst of the world sea, which was the Norse universe. And off in one direction across the world sea lay the land of the giants, and across the world sea in the other direction lay the land of the gods. On the Cosmic Uroboros, Midgard is the island of size scales that are familiar to us humans. But if we move beyond the shores of Midgard in either direction, outward into the expanding universe, well, outward into the expanding universe lies the land of the giants, black holes 1,000,000 times the mass of the sun, galaxies made of hundreds of billions of stars. In the opposite direction from Midgard, inward toward the small, lies a living cellular world. And within that, the quantum world. And these microlands may not be gods, literally, but compared to us, they're more prolific, more ancient, universal, and omnipresent. So living here in Midgard consciousness, we all have an intuitive sense of what a physical object is, something solid or at least measurable. Everybody agrees it's here. But what happens when our consciousness moves outside Midgard? The concept of physical becomes more and more abstract and metaphorical until it completely loses its meaning. So for example, is an electron a physical object? It's not a particle like a marble. An electron is a probability that something is happening. The probability is what's confirmed experimentally. So is a probability a physical object? And the same fade out into metaphor happens when we move into the large scales. Is a supercluster of galaxies a physical object? Our dot connecting minds see a supercluster as a sheet of maybe 10,000 large galaxies and many smaller ones, but it's not bound together by gravity, and it never will be. The opposite is happening. There's so much dark energy inside it that it is breaking the supercluster apart, tearing it apart. The thing is, the supercluster is so huge that the tearing apart will take billions of years. So is a supercluster a physical object? My point is this: not everything that is described by physics is what we intuitively think of as physical. Physical has a clear meaning only in Midgard. It's not characteristic of most of the universe. Now, we who are alive today are the first people to be able to know and feel this. And I think that the feeling of having and claiming and experiencing gratitude for our astonishing place at the metaphorical center of the universe is a spiritual opportunity. We're not only central in size, but as I mentioned, we're also made of the rarest material in the universe. And in our books, we lay out 5 or 6 more ways that amazingly intelligent beings are central to the fundamental characteristics of the modern universe. So I just used the word spiritual, and I want to define it. So spirituality, as I use it, means it's my experience of my connection to what I believe truly exists. So spirituality is an experience. Experiences are real, but the nature of the experience will vary dramatically based on what you think truly exists. Knowledge is a big expander of spiritual potential. There is no spiritual realm that transcends the universe, is outside the universe, or is independent of the laws of nature. The spiritual realm is real, but it's here inside the universe. On the Cosmic Uroboros, there exists a spiritual realm, and it is those exotic size scales far beyond Midgard, both large and small, that we humans can never visit or touch or ever see, except in computer simulations, but which have created us and maintain us from instant to instant and are our cosmic and biological ancestors on the Cosmic Uroboros. The land of the giants and the land of the gods are our spiritual universe. There is no physical spiritual dichotomy, is what I'm saying. Physical to spiritual is a continuum, and our physical world is at the center. So that is the picture of the universe that I am working from. How can any version of God possibly make sense in this? Well, you know, humans have the capacity to experience our indisputable connection to the universe out of which we emerged, but we can only do it if we have a metaphor system that can carry us there. The old ways of thinking about God cannot do it. Millions of people know this, and millions of people have abandoned the idea of God as impossible and destructive. In some ways, their lives are freer and more coherent than those of people who are trapped in religious dogma. But they have sacrificed their right to a meaningful connection to the universe. It is my observation that no matter how well someone seems to be doing in life, they are not operating on all cylinders until they find some access into their own spiritual power. But this is hard in the modern world because there isn't a current metaphor system that makes sense of spirituality in this scientific age. So many smart, secular citizens that we absolutely need to help save this world are not functioning on all cylinders. They have dismissed the possibility of a spiritually motivating story because that kind of lingo is associated with religious tall tales. What would benefit everyone far more than proclaiming opposition to magical gods or watering down the concept of God into some vague feel-good concept is to develop a new way of thinking about God that can truly serve our species in this very high-tech, low understanding, and dangerous era. So what I would like to do, or at least help to do, is to rescue the idea of God from the religions. Now, I'm not talking about rescuing the omnipotent creator of the universe. That image is exactly the kind of thing we need to rescue God from. I want to rescue what God stands for, a focal point of our highest aspirations. This is our opportunity to take Jung's amazing concept of God capacity and use it. The capacity belongs to us. We're human beings. We don't have to be members of a particular religion or ideology to use it. God capacity does not require any particular view of God. It is our inborn ability to scratch the itch for meaning with a symbol. Shouldn't we want that symbol to always represent the highest truth we know? So So this is the question that my own God capacity suggested to me. And I asked myself, could anything actually exist in the universe as science understands it that is worthy of being called God? The question, does God exist, just disappears because I'm starting from what exists. And I'm asking, what does something have to be before we'll call it God? There have been thousands of concepts of gods in history. What's the common thread? Is there a bottom line? What are the absolutely essential characteristics? If we eliminate all the magical God characteristics that are popular but cannot actually exist in this universe, like omniscience or the ability to violate the laws of nature, what exactly is left? And it turns out that in the new universe, there is something that is truly godlike to us. And it arises from one of the big ideas of modern science, emergence. In complexity theory, emergence is the natural process in which, from individual parts interacting in complex enough ways, something radically new that cannot be predicted from the nature of the individual parts emerges on a larger size scale. So, really simple example, this is supposed to be a water molecule. It's H2O. So this is a single molecule of H2O. Is it liquid? Is it ice? Or is it water vapor? Well, it's none of the above because these concepts are totally meaningless on the size scale of a single molecule. It's just 3 atoms. But when billions of H2O molecules come together, liquid water or ice or water vapor come into existence. They are what's called emergent phenomena. When you drink a glass of water, you don't see interacting molecules. The emergent phenomenon is what the reality is to us. Now, emergence happens across all size scales and is the main source of creativity in evolution. What does it look like in human beings? Well, let's start with something simpler. Let's start with ants. Before we get to humans, we'll do ants. Ants are extremely successful from an evolutionary point of view. They are on every continent on Earth except, ironically, Antarctica. They're very simple. They can recognize a few dozen pheromones, scent molecules, and they follow pheromone trails. They can tell the difference between meeting 2 ants and 200 ants in a minute, but that is pretty much the extent of their individual communication abilities. But if we put together 10,000 ants in a colony, suddenly the colony acts like a single organism with sophisticated abilities that none of the ants have. A harvest ant colony is continually adjusting the number of ants foraging for food based on the number of mouths to feed, how much food is already stored in the nest, how much food is available in the vicinity, even whether there are other ant colonies out there competing. But not a single ant knows or understands any of this. The colony can engineer the construction of an anthill higher than a man. But there is no engineer or architect, there's no leader, there's no plan. The colony, with its abilities, is an emergent phenomenon that comes into being not from the very limited nature of the ants, but from the complexity of their interactions. Emergence is a two-way street. The ants build the anthill, but the state and the age of the anthill tell each ant what to do. And some anthills can last a century, but each ant only lives a tiny portion of that time. The emergent phenomenon of a colony that acts like a single organism exists on a far larger size scale than ants can conceive. We are the ones who can conceive it. We are the ones who can use this knowledge. So let's get to people now. How does emergence work for us? Well, it turns out that every one of us is participating in countless emergent phenomena all the time. So from people trading things, the economy has emerged. And economies are governed by laws that we don't know in the beginning. We have to discover them, and lots of people are trying. From generations of people trying to get each other to behave better, governments and legal systems have emerged. From our human craving for gossip, the media has emerged. So emergent phenomena that arise from our own collective activities have immense power over our lives, but they're not human and they're not human-like, even though they only exist because of us. Emergent phenomena are real. It's not just a mental organizing tool. It's truly a new entity, and this is key to understanding my argument here. The emergent phenomenon is something radically new, different from its constituent parts, and it triggers, if not creates, new laws to describe it. Emergent phenomena are just as real as their constituent parts, which are often emergent phenomena themselves. I mean, what's real about me is not the atoms that I'm made of. They were somewhere else a few weeks ago, or at most a few years ago, but I have been living continuously since the middle of the last century. So what is that I? It's certainly real to me, and probably to you, because if it's not real, there's no one here giving this talk. So if we do not consider emergent phenomena to be real, then the only things that can be considered real are things that didn't evolve. And that means elementary particles that came straight out of the Big Bang. We would be making the insane claim that the evolution of the galaxies, of life, and of consciousness has been nothing more than the movement of particles and is completely describable by quantum mechanics. I actually know a few physicists and philosophers who argue this, but I have yet to meet one who really believes it. Because to believe it, they'd have to believe that they themselves are an illusion. In whose mind, I don't know. If we're not real by our physical standards, then we're insane by our psychological standards, and that is not a great foundation for a philosophy. Now, I am challenging us to think seriously about what we consider real, because this is an opportunity. What if God is an emergent phenomenon from us? It would be just as real as the economy, or the government, or your body, or your consciousness. So let's just think a little bit about what this could mean. If God is an emergent phenomenon from something we humans are doing, it has to be an activity that started so far back in prehistory that it predates the earliest ideas of gods. It has to be so basic that without it, we might not be human. What could that be? For millennia, philosophers and later scientists have struggled with the definition of human. Some claim it's what makes us human is our problem solving, our intelligence. Others say it's our tool making ability. Others say it's our facility with language. But actually, research does not support any of those theories. We're not the only problem solvers. There's a species of crow that can solve simple mechanical problems in advance without even having to go through trial and error, which is better than many humans. Primates use sticks or grass to fish termites out of logs. They use rocks to crack nuts. There's even birds that use cars. They have figured out how to drop nuts on a highway and wait for cars to drive over them to crack them open. We're not the only language users. Many animals communicate warnings, invitations, pleasure, threats with sounds and signals. So what is this very, very fundamental thing that we do? I think here, looking for the origin of the gods, we actually discover what made us human. And it's this. We humans change and grow, not just because we have to in order to adapt to external conditions. We change and grow also because we aspire. We are the aspiring species. Aspirations are not the same thing as desires like food and sex and security, because every animal has those. Aspirations reach beyond survival needs. They pull us. We feel driven to be better, to do things better, to belong or to escape, to be loved, to control, to possess, to be happier. Different people aspire to different things, but everybody aspires to something all the time. And it starts in infancy. Our aspirations shape each of us into the individual we are. So they are as real as we are. If we didn't have aspirations, we'd really just be meat with habits. Problem solving, tool making, language definitely helped improve humanity, but they would never have developed as they did if our distant ancestors had not been aspiring to do something better than it had been done before. So this is my proposal. God is endlessly emerging from the staggering complexity of all humanity's aspirations interacting across time. Each person, each of us begins to participate in this amazing emergent phenomenon from infancy, because even babies, it turns out, aspire. There's an amazing book called The Philosophical Baby by a professor at UC Berkeley, Alison Gopnik. And she says, cognitive scientists have discovered that even very young children can already consider possibilities, distinguish them from reality, and use them to change the world. Children's brains create causal theories of the world, maps of how the world works, and these theories allow children to envisage new possibilities and to imagine and pretend that the world is different. And this is the birth of aspiration. And Gopnik's research has found this starts about the age of 18 months. So many religious people worry, how can I connect to God? But if God is understood as emerging, we are all plugged in from infancy automatically. So here are a few other implications. God did not create the universe, but God created the meaning of the universe. And the meaning is what matters to us. This emergent phenomenon, the emerging God, provides the mental world in which we all live, what we could call the meaning sphere. Now think about this. The meaning of every single word has to be collectively agreed on, or it's just noise or marks on a page. We may disagree on definitions, but we can't even discuss our disagreements without agreeing on thousands of other words that we have to use. No individual could ever have come up alone with concepts like universe, meaning, science, hope, justice, self-determination. These are concepts that are collective creations that took many generations of people aspiring to understand and live better and to express their understanding. So emergence has created the languages, imagery, and the symbolism of our thoughts, which inspire us in turn to create new thoughts and allow us to share our minds. Science tells us that there's something out there that's 13.8 billion years old, from which our galaxy and our solar system evolved. But what I'm saying is God had nothing to do with it, because God did not exist then. However, if God had not emerged later, whatever is out there would remain unknown and meaningless, just as it is to the other animals on Earth. It wouldn't even be a universe, because universe is an idea and there would be no ideas. In this sense, the emerging God has truly created order from chaos. Humans did not create God. God emerged through laws of nature, not human intention. If you're a molecule of H2O, You only see the other molecules. The water does not exist for you. But if you, the molecule, could think like a human, you might gasp in awe to realize that by interacting with many of your fellows, water has come into existence. And from the interaction of vast amounts of water, oceans have come into existence, filled with life and creating new coastlines. The same laws of complexity and emergence are enabling God to exist through no intention of our own. An emerging God is our bridge to the universe. It's humanity's bridge to everything beyond our immediate, visible, material surroundings. It is what makes our consciousness huge. It is the gift of our ability to understand abstraction. It's what lets our consciousness grasp the immense history and future of the cosmos, the beauty of nature on all size scales, and our own place and our potential in this universe. It is our mental bridge to the spiritual realms of this universe. God's emergence from humanity has made the universe meaningful to us. So God is a planetary phenomenon. It's not universal. It's a planetary phenomenon. God is the God of all humanity, but only humanity. Now, this is a choice. This is a way we can choose to think. This godlike phenomenon is real, whatever you call it, and you don't have to call it God. But let me explain why I think we should. I'm going to stop screen sharing here for a moment. Every conscious human on this planet over the age of 3 or 4 has heard of God. God is the most powerful concept that humans have ever invented. There actually can't be a more powerful concept, or it would be God. So, as neuroscientists say, neurons that fire together wire together. And I would not be surprised if the concept of God is hardwired in our brains by now. The challenge is to figure out what the idea can mean for our time. We have got to crack open our God capacities. People have become allergic to the word God because of all the problems that religions have caused in the world. Many of my academic friends cannot understand why I want to use this baggage-laden word as a name for this real and important emergent phenomenon. But I think that we need to redefine God to give people a real choice. The choice is not between impossible God versus logic. The choice is, do we value our God capacity and try to use it for the benefit of our species? Or do we pretend it's unimportant and possibly obsolete and just abandon its vast ancient power over human behavior to be exploited by the smallest minded among us? That cannot lead to a good conclusion for the human race. When my book came out, there was this angry review on an atheist website, and the author wrote, "Who does Nancy Abrams think she is to redefine God? God is supernatural." No, God does not have to be supernatural. God can be real. If we cling to an obsolete image of God, even to reject it or to mock it, as that atheist blogger did, and as I used to do, we are doomed to small thinking, bickering, and possibly extinction. But if God is understood as an emergent phenomenon, then we have a scientific origin story for it, something that has not happened since the advent of monotheism. Science explains how such an emergent phenomenon could have come into existence. However, it cannot tell us what it's like, because the full nature of an emerging God will always be unknowable. Interesting point, because it's part of the universe, it might be possible to research aspects of it and actually learn true things about God, and that would be amazing. But the very aspiration to do so will already have changed God trillions of times per second given the world population. So it will always be light years ahead of us. Collectively, we humans change the character of God through the quality of our aspirations, good and bad, because that's God's raw material. We need to choose aspirations worthy of the kind of God we want to pass on to our children. Because otherwise, garbage in, garbage out. When I speak on this topic, I'm sometimes asked, well, isn't it incredibly dangerous to invent a new God? And look, I'll be the first to admit that passionate feelings about God have led to wars, injustice, depravity, and insane behavior throughout history. And looking around the world, it's still happening. But it has also given us art and imagination, reverence, sacrifice, comfort, and above all, endurance as a community. It has been for millions of people the only refuge in lives that are intolerable beyond the imagination of pretty much anybody on this Zoom. There is no question that spiritual passion can be horribly abused, but that doesn't mean we don't need it. What it means is we need to tame it the way our ancestors tamed fire. It is our fire. No culture has ever lived long without it, and we are unlikely to also. I think that this fire is what many smart people are missing and why we're doing such a terrible job at handling climate change. The way we think about God has to work for both our intellect and our feelings. Coherence between them is the key. Coherence is the source of peace of mind, peace with other people, and harmony with the universe. Something miraculous is emerging from us humans, and we have the choice to act as if this real and godlike phenomenon is God. We can attempt in the spiritual quest what my husband and his colleagues did when they were developing the double dark theory. We can mentally move into this new theory of God, not with belief, but with the commitment of a scientist, of a true seeker, to test it, to try it out, to see where it takes us. In my life, this has been amazingly fertile. I have found you can get all the spiritual benefits of God without the conflicts or the absurdities. Could this view unify humanity enough? Well, it's hard for me to imagine how our descendants can sustain a globally connected civilization for the coming thousands of years without common ground that is held sacred because it's our common ground and is common ground because it's based on science. People don't have to give up their separate religions and their diversity in many aspects of life, but we need to experience that beneath it all, there exists an unbreakable bond, the story of us, not as this religion or that kind of people, but as human beings in the evolving double dark universe. That story is our common ground, and it always will be. It's older than all the religions. It's readable in your blood, in your cells, in your atoms. Just look at your hand. The elementary particles your hand is made of right now came straight out of the Big Bang. Every one of us carries the history of the universe in ourselves, our bodies, our minds. When no one knew how the universe operated, any story would suffice to unify a community, but once we know, we know. Denial of the evidence just tears people apart, and it sows incoherence. But if we start from science and simply let that be the ground we build on, we can have a thrilling and a coherent big picture and a God that is real and meaningful and present right here and right now. And I find the fact that this is possible at all immensely reassuring and exciting. I'm going to end by proposing some shareable principles of a kind of planetary morality that follow from this idea. So let me go back to sharing. These are principles which are not about morality between individuals. We already pretty much understand that. But morality on the collective scale, where God is emerging. If the world could agree on these principles, we could solve all our problems and we could live together creatively and justly into the distant future. So 1, Earth is extraordinarily special in the evolving double dark universe, and beings like us may be rare or even unique in the cosmos and must be protected. 2, truth is the only possible foundation of a shareable, coherent picture of reality. 3, it took almost the entire age of the universe, 13.8 billion years, to evolve us, and our descendants could live comfortably on Earth for another billion years. This century is the pivotal moment when human decisions will make that future possible or impossible. 4, for a sustainable future, humanity's exponential rate of resource use must end and become slow material growth supported by boundless creativity. We must do more with less. 5, emergent phenomena are inevitable as any situation becomes orders of magnitude larger or more complex. So anticipate this, accept it, work with it, and be humble before reality. 6, there is one magnificent cosmic origin story, and it is equally true for everyone on Earth. To know who we are, we must tell it in every language, every medium, and every generation. 7, we humans may be the beginning of a multi-billion-year blossoming of intelligence in the visible universe, so let's act as if we are. Let's think of ourselves as the hottest startup ever. And finally, 8, God emerges from our aspirations, so embrace aspirations worthy of the kind of God you want. If there's only one idea that you take home from this talk, it should be this: God can be real, but cannot be sovereign. Mother Nature is sovereign, and God is our ambassador to her. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nancy. We're going to go back to you in just a minute. And let me remind our audience that we will probably run a little bit over. We have a response that is going to be made by Father Joseph Bracken. And following his response, Nancy, will you just simply come right back on, turn your microphone back on and your camera back on at that point after we hear from Father Bracken. And then after all of that, that'll take a few more minutes. After all of that, then we're going to open everything up for questions from the wider audience. They're starting to come in. If you'd like to pose a question, go down to the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, type your question, and again, it's got to be succinct, sharp, right to the point. So please help me in interpreting these questions by making them clear enough for me to understand. All right, so, but first we're going to go to Father Joseph Bracken, who is really a treasure in his contribution to philosophy and to theology. Father Bracken is classically trained in the Jesuit tradition, expert, of course, in the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas and the Thomistic tradition, but with a lot of courage, branched out from that to read Alfred North Whitehead and Charles Hartshorne and to interrogate them for their usefulness to Christian theology. And what you might find then is something that is going to resonate well with the talk that we have just heard. Some of you no doubt heard perhaps reverberations from Whitehead and Hartshorne in Nancy's talk. Well, Father Bracken is going to help us explicate that and analyze that just a little bit further and then pose some questions. So, Father Bracken, when you're ready, let's go to you.
I'm ready.
Go right ahead.
I guess I should just start talking. Let me start by saying that I can agree with about 75% of what Dr. Abrams is talking about. I give it a different twist, and I'll spend my time trying to show you how that twist could turn things into a somewhat different story. But I'm very much convinced that science has a new kind of a philosophy arising out of natural science, especially contemporary systems theory, with its emergent character, is going to be the new Aristotelian metaphysics, or the substitute for, because we do live in an evolutionary world. And I also believe very heartily that there's nothing wrong with naturalism. My problem is with materialism. And for that reason, I'm against it, materialism, because it's exclusive rather than inclusive. It excludes the non-material. Why? Why can't the immaterial be emergent out of the material? Or put it in the language of naturalism, why can't what we would call the supernatural be emergent out of the natural? Why not? I'll get to in a minute to why I say that with such confidence. And then, if I may modestly say so, I also am very strongly convinced, it's come to me over the past year or so in writing a new book for Lexington Academic, that basically the world is an organic universe, which means that it's composed of little organisms and big organisms. And the organisms have an interconnectedness that far surpasses any kind of connectedness of substances with one another in virtue of cause-effect relationships. That's out of date. Everything is interconnected at every moment with everything else through internal reciprocal relations with one another. Okay, let me get to my point in particular where she and I will presumably disagree. I'm going to start with her model of the worker ants and the emergent anthill, the great big anthill that she showed. And here's how, for the sake of time, I'll read this so that I'm not fumbling trying to explain something. Working together, the ants are co-constructing an ever-changing anthill, and that it changes from moment to moment. But the anthill is not an activity, but an entity. In other words, it's something objectively real that is not a super ant, a super activity, but the objective outcome of the activity of all the worker ants. Why is that important? Because then what we're saying is that reality is not either or, but both and. In other words, you've got dualism, and that's quite characteristic in its own way of Thomism. You've got process thought, which is very monistic in its own way, and I think Dr. Abrams illustrates that because of her belief in the power of the world as an evolving process. And then you've got non-dualism, which means that something is both and. It's more common in the East Asian philosophies than in the West. We're kind of hooked on Aristotle's principle of non-contradiction. That's wrong. Reality is much too complex. It's multidimensional. So none of us really understand anything in its totality because it would involve understanding everything else at the same time. But if an anthill is something that exists in its own right, even though its growth in size and shape depends upon the activity of the constituents, the ants, then it is a dynamic unity of otherwise very different constituents working together to achieve a common effect. That's what we mean by a system, an emergent system, that is, as opposed to a closed system. An emergent system is on the move. Closed systems exist in the mind of human beings. Applied to the reality of God and the cosmic process, for me, this means that ultimate reality is both entity and activity at the same time. That is, ultimate reality is an objective reality grounded in the ongoing interrelated activity of all its finite constituents from moment to moment. As such, it is a primordial life system which serves as the ground of being or abiding energy source for the gradual emergence of all the hierarchically ordered finite life systems of this world that have come and gone over the millennia. I realize this is a philosophical presupposition, not an empirically verifiable given. But on the other hand, I argue with Goethe in his incompleteness theory that no system can justify or include within itself its own starting point at the risk of being a purely conceptual system, as having no touch with reality. Ultimate reality, therefore, should be understood as entity and activity, and as an entity, constituted indeed by interrelated activities, it represents the context, the origin, the current state of existence, and the ultimate destination of the cosmic process. Within this context, it's very easy to come up with a new understanding of the traditional God-world relationship that is other than the non-dualism of classical metaphysics, also totally other than the ontological monism of most process thinkers like Whitehead, but a non-dual reality in which God as a primordial life system influences the cosmic process at work within itself without controlling it. That's basically where I stand. End of comments.
So Nancy, feel free now to go ahead and offer any kind of response that you would like.
Hey, well, my only response is I don't actually understand where we disagree. Much of the theology I don't follow. I'm not a theologian, but if you could be more precise about what we actually disagree on, I would appreciate that.
We definitely do. Basically, I'm as faithful to the notion of emergence as you are. Yes. I just think that what comes out of a theory of emergence is not just a complex of activities that kind of produce us from moment to moment, but entities, life systems that have their own integrity. And you said as much in your comments that emergence produces something genuinely new. It's a qualitative whole bigger than the sum of its constituent parts. At least that's how I read you.
Yes, and but I said emergent phenomena are real, and they're often made of other emergent phenomena interacting. So
Sure. Well, again, it takes, as you very nicely said, it takes all the constituents, entities. Well, maybe let me back up and say it this way. Activities produce the reality of entities from moment to moment. You've got a constant conversion of potentiality into actuality from moment to moment. On the other hand, no activity exists simply by itself and for itself. It came from some primordial entity or some even more primitive life source, exists within it, somewhat like the Big Bang emerging out of the energy source of God. And then eventually our universe is destined to be incorporated into back into this primordial reality. And that's our one chance really for immortality. We're not destined to live naturally forever. If we got to be part of something a lot bigger than ourselves, or we ain't gonna make it. Well, enough there with what I just said.
So this is Ron cutting in again. If you would like to make any additional comment, that would be fine. Thank you so much to Professor Dr. Joseph Bracken. The philosophical brilliance of your comments, I think, have our heads spinning. And I think a lot of us can sympathize with what Nancy has pushed back here and said, well, so what then is the difference? Let me offer Nancy maybe our first question from the audience. It builds on a couple that I have received. We'll have time for a couple more, I think, so feel free to type your question in and I'll queue it up for Nancy over the next few minutes. We're just a few minutes past the end of the scheduled time, but we'll go for maybe 10 more minutes at most. But Nancy, let me invite you to reflect on this question. And I think it's just maybe a more concrete way to present what Dr. Bracken was saying. God is emergent, as you understand God. Is God complete?
No.
Is God complete yet?
Never.
Never complete. Okay.
No, it cannot be. I mentioned it.
But let me finish the question. If God is not complete, is God real?
Well, is the economy complete? Is the government, is our legal system complete? No, our legal system is an emergent phenomenon, but we are changing it all the time. And the same thing with God. If it is emerging from human aspirations, our aspirations are changing and growing. New people are being born. People are dying. An emerging God is constantly changing.
I assume that that's where you would go with that. But the question, though, is how can something be both emergent and incomplete and yet real?
Because everything that is emergent is incomplete and real. We are all incomplete. We're all learning things. Every one of us is an emergent phenomenon. I'm made of trillions of cells, but I'm not just a big blob of cells. There's an order and something has come out of it, which is me as a person, which I mentioned, I've been around a lot longer than my cells or my atoms have been. We are constantly changing. That's what an evolving universe is. Everything is changing. The galaxies are evolving. Nothing is complete.
All right. Well, thank you. It's very helpful. And I just want to make sure that was all quite clear.
Could I get in here for just a minute?
Yeah.
Basically, Dr. Abrams, I really enjoyed your comment about a God capacity. The only difference is we have a God capacity because we're made in the image and likeness of God, who has an enormous capacity for change and improvement and so on and so forth. The classic mistake of Aquinas, a brilliant man, was that he took Aristotle's unmoved mover and made it much too close, gave it much too close an affinity with Aristotle's prime mover. And it was easy because Christians always believe that God is omnipotent, omniscient, and so forth. But it's fatal because you lose sight of the human and the individual in the overview of a totally objective world plan, so to speak. That's it.
So we're down to the final minutes here. Here's a question that has come in from a number of sources in one way or another. So, Dr. Abrams, what would you say to people who say, well, very nice, eloquent, but I don't personally feel a need for spirituality? Why should I feel such a need?
Well, I can't tell people what they should feel. And if people don't feel any need for something, they probably won't make any effort to get it. But I told you it was my observation that people who have no spiritual connection are not operating on all cylinders. And I'll tell you that the source of my observations is 35 years of listening to people who are trying to change their lives, struggling with the concept of higher power and trying to figure out how they can possibly make sense of it and how they can use it in their lives. I have seen enormous transformations in people who thought they were living fine lives. They just had a little problem with this or a little problem with that. But in solving their little problem with this or that, which turned out to be an addiction, through the concept of higher power, they have changed everything about their lives, the way they get along with people, their whole outlook as to what matters in life. If you don't have any interest in spirituality, fine. You're probably going to just be fine and happy. But if you have anything in your life that you have not really been able to deal with on your own, to your own satisfaction, you might want to consider that this is the reason.
Others have asked this question about consciousness, not human consciousness, but God's consciousness. And let's preface it by thinking about strong theories of AI, the internet, or perhaps Teilhard de Chardin, the noosphere. One listener flagged that when you put up the slide about God as a planetary phenomenon. Is God conscious in any sense of that word? And knowing that debate divides Western theists from other religious traditions. Is God conscious in any sense, at least as conscious as the Teilhard's noosphere or maybe Ray Kurzweil's cosmic kind of intelligence?
An emerging God is not conscious the way that we are conscious, any more than an ant colony is like an ant. It's something new. It's something so much bigger. We can understand how it came about. We can understand what it can do for us and what we are doing for it. But as I said, we cannot know its nature. We can discover possibly part of it. Because it's real, we may discover part of its nature by research, scientific research. But no, we cannot. I think it's a big mistake to try to think of God as a brain like a human brain. That is so diminishing of what it actually could be. And it's also, it's making it impossible to understand the concept of emergence. If you think that God is like us, you have totally missed the point of emergence.
I think we have maybe time for one final question. And this, again, emerged from a couple of, sorry about the word emerged, it arose from a couple of people thinking about this. God as emergent, can such a God guide humanity? And I think it's all going to, your answer is going to hinge on how we might define the word guide. Not so much whisper in our ear, do this, don't do that, but what, inspire? Or back to Alfred North Whitehead again, the idea of a cosmic lure drawing us in a certain direction. Can your God guide humanity through this rather difficult time, not just this pandemic, but this rather bleak period in human history?
It doesn't guide us because it has some kind of notion of where we should go. That I eliminate completely. But if we understood it, we would have more power in ourselves. We would be able to draw on it. We would be able to understand how the universe operates and how we fit in, and how by seeing how we fit in on the larger size scales, which I was not able to explain that tonight. It's in the book, but we enlarge ourselves. We enlarge our own consciousness. We are able to communicate with people. We are not afraid of discovery. We change by believing this. But no, I do not believe that God has any kind of a plan or would guide us. It can't have a plan, so it's not going to guide us. It doesn't. Right. It's not like us. This is the key thing. It's not like us. There have been several reviews of my book that made the same mistake. And the mistake was that they said that I was claiming that God is the sum of our aspirations. But a sum and emergence are completely different things.
Right.
Emergence is something completely new that arises out of the interactions of something. It's not just putting things together and having a larger lump. So that is really key. And when you understand that emergence works that way, then you get a little bit of humility. I mean, it always amazes me that people want to talk about what God is like when they don't even understand what a human being is. If you don't understand the universe you're living in, you don't really understand what it means to be the human part of this universe. So I think the first thing to do is try to figure out what am I as a human being? I mean, you don't need cosmology to know who you are, because that's going to be compared to other people. But you need cosmology to know what you are. And I think you need to know that before you start trying to say what God could be.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you to Dr. Bracken for his insightful comments. Thank you so much to Professor Dr. Abrams. We'll scratch our heads, I think, for quite some time about just how God might inspire and guide us. But I have no doubt whatsoever that this talk and this evening the clarity and the forcefulness of your presentation has inspired us and guided us. And for that, we are indeed in your debt.